The ultimate goal for anybody putting work into a movie should be to create the best final product possible. It's about passion, pride, and bringing something special to potentially millions of people. However, if you were to scrutinise just about any film throughout history, chances are you would find at least a handful of mistakes in every single one of them. Mistakes are an undeniable part of life, and though movie makers may be at the very top of their game, they are still human after all. While some errors are barely noticeable, there are others that you don't have to look very hard to find. In fact, you couldn't miss them even if you tried, and these are the movie mistakes staring you in the face. A very visible green screen in Hot Fuzz. When Simon Pegg and Nick Frost came together again to work with Edgar Wright after the success of Shaun of the Dead, they offered up something completely different. Hot Fuzz swapped out zombies for policemen, and Pegg's pathetic Shaun for the absolute badass that was Sergeant Angel. The big action set piece towards the end of the film was the off-the-wall car chase throughout the countryside, with Angel and Frost's Danny tracking down Simon Skinner, played by Timothy Dalton, and Inspector Butterman, played by Jim Broadbent. It was adrenaline pumping, with quick camera changes between the characters and the cars. In one shot that lasted no more than a second, a painfully obvious oversight can be seen. With a focus on Danny and Angel's car, the quaint countryside scenery was replaced by a green screen that had clearly been missed in the editing process. It was only for a split second, but it was unmissable. Obviously, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Jim Broadbent, and Timothy Dalton weren't actually engaged in a high-speed chase, and so the green screen was utilised as it is with many driving shots. However, the most important thing to remember here is that this technique is only effective if you actually do something with all that green afterwards.
The camera operator wipes the abyss. Trying to shoot a movie which involves a lot of very real moving water can be a rather tricky experience. On top of that liquid potentially damaging the equipment needed to get scenes in the can, there's also the risk of it splashing up over the lens of a camera and ruining a shot. And that's seemingly what happened whilst capturing one moment in James Cameron's tense underwater sci-fi movie The Abyss. While there are some who understandably may have assumed the actors being blocked for a few seconds was little more than some objects hanging down from the roof, during the moment Bud tries to make Lindsay put on their only diving suit as their mini-sub continues to let in water, that doesn't actually appear to be the case. Instead, it looks like the camera operator was just wiping the lens of the equipment here, with Cameron probably just feeling this brief illusion breaker wasn't noticeable enough to justify going back to reshoot an otherwise brilliantly intense take during this infamously grueling production. Honestly though, Bud and Lindsay's chilly ordeal is so gripping that it's tough to catch this little human error even when you're aware of its existence. The lifeguard's magic shoe, Jaws. Steven Spielberg's Jaws is such a perfect organism of a movie that it's incredibly easy to forgive its flaws, or perhaps even gloss over them entirely. Case in point, almost exactly halfway through the film, the shark enters a pond area and attacks a man who is out rowing a boat near Michael Brody. The man's boat is overturned and he falls into the water with the shark fast approaching him, at which point we can clearly see that the man is barefoot and definitely not wearing any shoes. Except a few shots later when the shark devours him, and we see his severed leg hit the bottom of the ocean floor, he's very clearly wearing a white tennis shoe. Considering how iconic and to kids of a certain age traumatizing the shot of the severed leg actually is, it's honestly surprising that more viewers haven't noticed this discrepancy over the years. We can assume there was probably some miscommunication between Spielberg and the movie's prop team here, or that the actor playing the victim simply removed his shoes without anyone noticing. But we have now.
8 years later, in Spider-Man: Homecoming. The timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is no longer as straightforward as it once was. In the franchise's early days, with the exception of Captain America: The First Avenger, the movies were typically released in a near enough chronological order. However, even before things got more complicated, mistakes were made. Arguably the biggest came at the beginning of Spider-Man: Homecoming. Peter Parker's first MCU standalone outing kicked off by taking things back to the Battle of New York, the first coming together of the Avengers that famously took place in 2012. After the opening scene, in huge white letters across a black screen came the words, 8 years later. For a film that was released in 2017, this immediately caused confusion as such a jump would put the events of the story in 2020, 3 years in the future. Clearly this was a mistake, and it has been confirmed as such since. In an interview, Joe Russo confirmed that the 8 years time gap was very wrong, a point that has also been driven home by missed minutes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and open timeline. With all the storylines and details across the grander MCU to have adhered to, forgetting how long ago the first Avengers movie was seems as avoidable an error as the franchise has made.
A line is bizarrely repeated, Whiplash. During one of the few moments when young jazz drummer Andrew Nyman didn't find himself being mercilessly bullied by his ruthless instructor Terence Fletcher, the talented percussionist sat down for some dinner with his family in Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. And it's during that meal when Andrew lets them know that he's become the new core drummer in the Schaefer Conservatory Studio Band. But then something strange goes down that you won't believe you ever missed. As Travis enters and the rest of the room swiftly turns their attention to the incoming American football MVP, listen closely and you'll actually hear Andrew's words of new core drummer eerily being spoken again. This seemingly isn't a case of somebody else sitting around the table repeating those words back to the quickly ignored drummer either. That definitely sounds like Miles Teller once again delivering the line. A moment that feels even weirder when combined with the visual of Andy's mouth being very much closed here. Either Andrew's inner monologue briefly became audible mid-scene, or this was simply a mistake unintentionally left in the finished product when mixing a movie that actually took home the Oscar for Best Sound Mixing. Awkward. Aragorn's Vanishing Sword, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Now this one's really weird, and will forever change how you view the Battle of Helm's Deep in the second Lord of the Rings movie. Early on in the battle when Aragorn signals his archers to fire, he does so with his sword, which strangely vanishes into thin air on the downstroke. As Aragorn swings it towards the screen, only the hilt remains visible in his hand, with the actual blade component of the weapon magically nowhere to be seen. Fans have theorized that this was most likely a VFX-related gaffe. That part of the shot was masked to enhance the background of the scene, likely adding more archers behind Aragorn, with the sword's blade accidentally getting erased also. For a film that's so meticulously crafted, it's quite the odd mistake. And yet the moment passes quickly enough that it's relatively easily missed amid all the battle's excitement. Bubba's lip, Forrest Gump. Michael T. Williamson gives an unforgettable performance in Forrest Gump as Forrest's tragically ill-fated war buddy Bubba. And one of the character's most distinctive physical characteristics is his prominently protruding lip. This wasn't achieved by simply having Williamson jut out his lip for the entirety of the shoot though. He actually wore a subtle lip prosthetic during filming, so he didn't have to consciously perform the affectation at all times. And yet there's one scene where the production presumably forgot to fit the actor with the false lip. When Bubba and Forrest are riding in a chopper in Vietnam as they go to war, look closely at Bubba and his lip isn't sticking out at all. Quite what went wrong here is anyone's guess. Hell, perhaps the prosthetic just fell off Williamson's lip during filming, and nobody caught it while cameras were rolling. A minor mistake, for sure, but one that'll nag you every time you watch it now. So, sorry for that.
Disappearing chess pieces in Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls. Neither Ace Ventura: Pet Detective nor its follow-up When Nature Calls are the type of movie where a watertight story and lack of any plot holes are at the top of the priority list. It's about laughing at Jim Carrey being Jim Carrey, playing a man who talks out of his own backside. However, that being said, there was one very basic continuity error spotted throughout the sequel that was absolutely impossible to ignore. Namely, during a conversation between Ace and Vincent Cadby. An entire board's worth of chess pieces goes missing. In one frame they're there, but after a couple of camera cuts, the board is completely empty. It's not even like it was just in the background, it was in between the two characters and could not be missed.
A Vanishing Sword, Dune Part 1. From a vanishing car to a disappearing sword. Boasting without question some of the most impressive and consistently gorgeous visual effects work of recent times. Both of Denis Villeneuve's Dune pictures are overflowing with rich detail in just about every single shot. But even some of the most well-crafted movies of all time still contain the odd error here and there. And that was certainly the case in Part 1 of this Dune saga. Keep an eye on one of the 3 Sardaukar soldiers closing in on Dr. Liat Kynes in the middle of the Arrakis desert, and you'll spot that merciless warrior on the far left's weapon oddly turning invisible for a second or two as they react to the incoming sandworm of doom. It's most likely this particular Sardaukar and their reaction to the Shai-Hulud tremors were shot in front of a blue screen, with the VFX team then probably only noticing that this blade awkwardly hadn't fully survived the process of being added to the rest of the desert sequence way too late in the day. Luckily though, you were no doubt too busy keeping an eye on all that shifting sand to notice this Sardaukar's sword had strangely gone walkabout for a few seconds. Mikey calls Bran Josh the Goonies. The Goonies is one of the greatest films of the 1980s, and one that touts an hilarious instance of a young actor accidentally breaking character in the middle of a take. Roughly 40 minutes into the film, Sean Astin's Mikey says to Bran, played by Josh Brolin, "There's something buried under there, Josh," unintentionally referring to the actor by his real name. It happens. While you might not understand how you could have missed such a glaring mistake, it's worth pointing out that Mikey and Bran talk over each other during this exchange, so the word Josh is ever so slightly garbled when it comes out of Sean Astin's mouth. All the same, once you know it's there, there's no unhearing it at all. We can assume that director Richard Donner didn't hear it during editing, or felt it was concealed enough through their banter that it didn't need to be redubbed in post-production.
The bullet holes were already there in Pulp Fiction. There aren't many characters more iconic and popular through Tarantino's back catalogue than Samuel L. Jackson's Jules Winfield, with his views on divine intervention being a key part of the movie's conclusion. How he arrived at this view is heavily influenced by being shot almost at point-blank range with every single bullet miraculously missing. He knew he should have been dead. The scene itself is excellent, but there is one glaring flaw that you can't unsee once you notice it. The fact that Jules and Vincent turn around to see the bullet holes in the wall rather than the former's chest is undermined slightly by the fact that you can see one of them behind each of Jules' shoulders before any shots were fired. The internet is spattered with theories trying to make sense of the error, with some suggesting the gun was actually a blank and that the bullet holes were from a previous incident. But in reality, this is clearly a rare oversight from Tarantino.
The bad guy waits for their cue, Cyborg. A movie scene or shot can be saved or soiled in the editing suite. If you need an example of just how much of a difference the decision to leave a few additional seconds in a sequence can make, well, look no further than this rather comical but easily overlooked mistake that was ultimately left in Albert Pyun's 1989 cyberpunk actioner known as Cyborg. As Jean-Claude Van Damme's Gibson Rickenbacker and Deborah Richter's Nadie Simmons flee their enemies through a salt marsh, the action cuts to a number of other adversaries sprinting towards the martial arts legend, looking to kick some cool-looking ass in a puddle. But if you stop focusing on the mountain of beef charging towards Gibson for a moment, the odd visual of their fellow pirate just standing still for a bit in the background, before seemingly remembering where they were, becomes a hilarious distraction you won't believe you ever missed. What probably happened here is that the enemy in question was waiting for a cue to start running. Rather than cut the moment so it picked up right as he was mid-sprint though, the editor clearly overlooked the baddie frozen still in the distance for a few seconds, and just happily threw this awkward version of the shot into the finished picture. And it's now immortalized for us all to see. Wonderful. Thanks for checking out this video today. Hit that subscribe button down below for more of this What Culture stuff in your life. The Premature, Bloodstain, The Matrix. Like any effects-heavy blockbuster, The Matrix has a mind-boggling number of moving parts, and so it's little surprise that the film is packed to the gills with momentary mistakes that the Wachowski sisters simply hoped you'd be too enthralled to pay much attention to. This being the internet though, of course people spotted each and every single one of them. There is one especially noticeable continuity gaffe late in the film, when Neo is shot twice by Agent Smith and stumbles backwards into the wall behind him. Look closely as Neo stumbles though, and you'll see that there's already a bloodstain on the wall, which Neo is then falling backwards into, despite prior shots of the wall showing no blood whatsoever. Clearly this was a continuity issue, where the shots were filmed out of order and a crew member either forgot to clean the blood from the wall, or the Wachowskis simply assumed that nobody would notice. Again, we did. Either way, it's very much a glitch in the Matrix itself that Neo's blood smears itself on the wall before he's even made contact with it. You showing up here is no glitch though, and we thank you for that. If you like what you're watching, then hit that subscribe button down below, my friends.
a cowboy pirate in Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. Spanning over 5 movies and grossing around $4.5 billion worldwide, the Pirates of the Caribbean is one of the biggest cinematic franchises in the world. Even so, a series like this Disney behemoth is susceptible to the odd mistake, some of which are made more obvious by the setting. There are films where if someone who wasn't supposed to be there makes it onto the screen, may have half a chance of blending in with the people around them, depending on the scene. But that is not the case when a crew member gets caught in front of the camera in Pirates. There's absolutely no chance of camouflaging in the background when everyone else is dressed in full pirate gear, ready to hoist the sails and bring Jack Sparrow to that horizon. And that's exactly what happened at the end of The Curse of the Black Pearl. Just as Captain Jack calls his crewmates scabrous dogs, a man in a white t-shirt, sunglasses and a cowboy hat can be seen in the background. Johnny Depp's legendary pirate picked up all manner of character to form his ragtag crew in his first outing, but even against a parrot that learned to speak on its own, a cowboy seems like a bit of a stretch.
The President's Changing Suit, Forrest Gump. There aren't many movies out there that have been rewatched quite as often as Robert Zemeckis' moving and charming tale of Forrest Gump. And that's what makes the fact that many have likely never spotted one rather obvious mistake hidden in the middle of this epic life story so surprising. One of the more memorable sequences in the Tom Hanks starring Oscar winner sees the titular figure meet President John F. Kennedy, with that amusing black and white scene ending with Gump admitting that he was dying for a piss. But while you were busy chuckling at Gump's weak bladder, you likely didn't notice that JFK's wardrobe had suddenly gone through a bit of a transformation mid-scene. The suit and tie the president is wearing as he shakes hands with the football player completely changes when the scene cuts to JFK laughing about Gump needing the bathroom. It seems the filmmakers used 2 separate pieces of JFK footage to create this fictional interaction, but then opted not to edit his outfit to make it look consistent throughout the scene. They were probably hoping you'd be too fixated on an awkward Gump to catch the fastest changing president of all time, the visible Contrail, Marie Antoinette. Shooting a period film is just a massive pain in the ass, really, and one of the many reasons that historical movies tend to have higher budgets than contemporary fare is the effort they must make to accurately capture the period. And even accepting that Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette is willingly packed with anachronistic music and fashion choices, there is one scene where an out-of-time artifact was most certainly not intended. Roughly 85 minutes into the film, when Marie is playing outside in a meadow with her daughter, a low-angle shot shows her looking up to the sky, where the contrail of an aircraft is very obviously visible cutting through the skyline. This is the sort of gaffe which could be removed with relative ease on even home computers these days. And yet back in 2006, Coppola either simply didn't notice, or didn't consider it disruptive enough to spend any of the movie's svelte $40 million budget correcting it.
Captain America's shield fixes itself in Avengers Endgame. The final act of Avengers Endgame boasted some truly epic moments like the various snaps and returning characters, but the final hour of the movie also gained attention for a few real head scratchers too. When Thanos completely decimated Captain America's shield, it was designed to drive home just how much of a physical threat he was even without the Infinity Stones. The vibranium weapon, one that had saved Steve Rogers' life on more than one occasion, was snapped in half after being savagely attacked by Thanos' blade. Now this was a big deal, and was something that left Steve as good as defenseless on a battlefield boasting the kind of cosmic and alien power he simply couldn't compete with, even being Captain America. And yet, when the camera pans back to show the scale of the Avengers forces after the dead heroes returned, the shield can be seen completely whole and good as new. No, Cap did not utilise the time stone, he didn't have another shield at hand, and he certainly didn't piece the fractured vibranium back together. Continuity errors happen all the time, only this was at one of the biggest points of one of the biggest movies of all time, so naturally was seen by just about everybody.
Holly's name is misspelled in the Nakatomi Plaza directory, Die Hard. Joining Forrest Gump as another all-time classic many have dusted off time and time again over the decades, John McTiernan's Die Hard sits as one of the true action masterpieces. Buried in John McClane's thrilling quest to stop a bunch of terrorists blowing up a Nakatomi Plaza containing his own estranged wife though, is a blunder that's been hidden away under your nose since 1988. There's a point there early on, before things get a little more explosive, when the NYPD detective enters his wife's workplace after checking out the plaza's directory. At a glance, nothing appeared all that strange about the sight of Holly Gennaro's name in both the plaza's computer and on her office door. But if you take a second to really look at both the screen and that piece of wood, a rather glaring error soon becomes unmissable. You see, while the computer directory incorrectly thinks this Nakatomi Corporation employee's name is spelt Gennaro with an A, Holly's door clearly shows that it's actually Gennaro with an E a few moments later. It's an admittedly tiny mistake, but one you still won't believe you've never once pointed out after no doubt watching Bruce Willis clash with Alan Rickman in a skyscraper on numerous glorious occasions over the years. Woody Harrelson's blatant dubbing, Triangle of Sadness. Generally speaking, automated dialogue replacement, or ADR, is a basic enough part of movie production that audiences can't tell when an actor has re-recorded their lines. Most of the time, that is. But despite winning the Cannes Film Festival's Palme d'Or and scoring numerous Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, recent class satire Triangle of Sadness features one of the most egregiously bad instances of ADR in any major recent movie. And yet you probably somehow missed it. When the imperiled ship's captain is shown discussing politics with Russian oligarch Dmitry, he says never argue with an idiot, they'll only bring you down to their level and beat you with experience, before attributing the quote to Mark Twain. However, if you look at Woody Harrelson's mouth movement, it's incredibly obvious he doesn't say Mark Twain. And if you're even a half-skilled lip reader, you can probably tell that he's actually saying George Carlin. It's a baffling redub, honestly. Firstly, because it would have been completely consistent with Harrison's character to incorrectly attribute the quote to Carlin, and the quote doesn't even belong to Twain anyway. This is one of those head-scratching mistakes you'll never be able to unsee on repeat viewings. So, sorry about that.
Handling a Velociraptor in Jurassic Park. To create Jurassic Park back in 1993 with the cinematic technology where it was at the time was nothing short of a Herculean task. And yet, what Steven Spielberg and his team brought to life is lauded still even some 3 decades later. Of course, there was a huge amount of CGI that went into bringing the dinosaurs Isla Nubula to life, but there were also practical effects at work as well, particularly with the smaller dinos like the Velociraptors or the Dilophosaurus. There was a certain human element to proceeding. One of the former's most iconic scenes in Jurassic Park came as one of the ruthless carnivores stalked Tim and Lex in the kitchen. The shock of seeing the beast turning the door handle before entering the kitchen is the epitome of tension and anticipation. But there is one oh so tiny detail that may just blemish the scene ever so slightly. As the raptor steps through the door, you can clearly see an arm reach out to steady its tail, something that should have been caught and removed long before the iconic movie was ever released. Jurassic Park offers no shortage of mistakes on screen, with his just narrowly beating the cliff that appeared out of nowhere as one of the worst.
Accidental crew cameo, Elf. Now for another example of a movie crew member unintentionally popping up on screen that you've probably never noticed. Remember in Jon Favreau's Elf when Michael tried his best to evade his Christmas-loving brother, after Buddy patiently waited for him outside of his school? Well, not long after this rather large elf nearly becomes New York City roadkill, Michael pretends to not hear his giddy half-sibling as he charges away down the street. And it's during that attempt to flee when what looks like a rogue crew member chooses to step out of a nearby doorway at exactly the wrong moment. Admittedly, this could have also just been a real-life New York City citizen trying to casually start their day, only to find themselves awkwardly caught in the middle of one of the most beloved holiday movies of all time. Either way though, the just about noticeable expression on this human's mug tells the story of a person who definitely wasn't supposed to be present during this specific chunk of Elf. Ian Malcolm can't handle Binoculars, The Lost World Jurassic Park. Okay, now this one is real funny, folks. Can you even remotely blame Jeff Goldblum for goofing around on the set of The Lost World? Or if you want to be less generous to him, failing to operate a pair of binoculars. Despite his Dr. Ian Malcolm being a genius mathematician, shortly after he arrives on Isla Sorna, he picks up Eddie Carr's binoculars to look at the arriving InGen fleet. Yet he's actually hilariously holding them to his face backwards. In reality, this would only make the choppers look further away, and certainly ensure he couldn't spot the InGen logo on them. Yet the film itself suggests that Malcolm is indeed operating the binoculars as intended. What a guy. One can't put it past Goldblum for seeing what he could get away with here, and accidentally getting a minor prank into the final cut of the movie. But at the same time, it's entirely possible he just fumbled picking up the binoculars and ran with it, because why not?
Sonny's swing and a miss in The Godfather. If you ask anyone what their favourite movie of all time is, there is always a decent chance The Godfather's up there. Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece is widely regarded as one of the most popular movies ever, but even those that do claim it as their favourite couldn't call it perfect. Close as it may be, there is one small moment in one scene that can't be ignored. Namely, when Sonny swings a punch at Carlo while beating him up and completely misses. Technically, Sonny missing Carlo with the punch isn't a mistake in itself. James Caan wasn't really hitting Gianni Russo, and so every one of those punches missed, but not like this one swing. There is a good 6 inches between Sonny's fist and Carlos's face as it flies by, but that didn't stop the latter from flying backwards. There are times throughout cinema where, for whatever reason, they only have one shot at a certain scene. If something goes wrong, the director is forced to live with it. This was not one of those scenes, however. This was a relatively small scene in the movie that could easily have been reshot to make the attack look just that little bit more real.
A mic pack falls out of a pant leg. Stand By Me. Rob Reiner's 1986 coming-of-age drama Stand By Me, about a bunch of young lads searching for a dead body, isn't just one of the most rewatchable and adored Stephen King adaptations ever to land on the big screen. It's a movie many would honestly class as one of the real greats, full stop. Even the classics come with the odd, largely overlooked mistake though. Incoming trains, blood-sucking leeches, and despicable gangs weren't the only things the central foursome of Chris, Gordy, Teddy and Vern had to deal with during this 89-minute adventure. They also found themselves battling with filming equipment. After Teddy is yanked off the tracks by Chris as a train approaches, the two bicker a little before making up by skinning it. The team then carry on their journey. But if you really focus in on poor old Jerry O'Connell as his Vern creeps towards the tracks here, you'll finally clock a comical mistake that was quite literally weighing him down during the moment. As O'Connell starts to favour his left leg a bit, a quick glance down at his foot reveals what looks like his mic pack escaping down his trouser leg. The scene swiftly ends as the child actor awkwardly tries to carry on as normal. But this unfortunate mistake just makes the entire moment that little bit more charming, really. But obvious library facade is obvious. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Much as we all love watching 4K restorations of classic movies, I know I do, it creates an absolute cluster headache for the filmmakers themselves. Because higher resolution releases ensure that audiences can pick out mistakes which were not visible on lower detail earlier versions. Case in point, we have Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Roughly 30 minutes into the movie, Indy heads to a Venetian library in pursuit of his father, Henry. And when he climbs a staircase and discovers the giant X on the library's floor, take a look at the bookshelf behind him. In the 4K version of the film in particular, it's hilariously obvious that the bookshelf is just a thin facade, with the books all being superficial semblances of actual books at absolute best. Fans went decades never noticing this on prior releases of the movie, but in its Ultra HD glory, it's incredibly obvious. Sure, you can try to convince yourself that it's a mere intentional decoration in the world of the movie itself, but let's be honest, it was simply that the production designers never expected that viewers would be able to fixate on a crystal clear high-resolution screen grab of their work. But here we are!
Harry did not have his mother's eyes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Harry Potter never knew his parents, though as he grew up in Hogwarts, he was surrounded by people who did. He was always told the same thing, that he looked exactly like his father with the exception of his eyes. He had his mother's eyes. This was an important part of the lore in the source material, and it translated over to the movies to a degree. The thought was there, but the fact is that on the big screen, Harry's eyes simply did not look anything like his mother's. You'd be forgiven for thinking that with such a point being made about the comparison, that effort would have been put in to back it up. But no, Harry's eyes were blue, while his mother's, as shown in Snape's memories after he joins the list of people to have vocalised the thoughts of the boy who lived, were not. Daniel Radcliffe was initially given contact lenses to portray green eyes, but he was allergic to them, so Harry's eyes remained blue. This wouldn't have been a problem had a similarly blue-eyed actor been cast to play the relatively small role of his mother in the Deathly Hallows Part 2.
Invisible Arrows, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. Ending with possibly the closest thing to movie battle perfection you'll ever see on the big screen. The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers concludes with one of the most explosive, moving and exhilarating wars ever experienced by we mortal humans. As the likes of the brave Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas help the forces of men and elves retreat from the incoming Uruk-hai looking to break through Helm's Deep's walls, there is a just about visible little flaw that has somehow gone unnoticed by the average Rings lover, even after their 40th extended edition marathon. In case you weren't aware, many of the archers seen firing out projectiles here weren't actually doing that on the day. CGI arrows were simply added in after the scenes were shot. Most of the time. In the case of one silly-looking human warrior shooting at the enemy from up high, however, it seems the VFX team awkwardly forgot to add in the digital arrows needed to make it look like they weren't just pretending to be an archer in the middle of this intense war. And now you'll never unsee this poor soul shooting out imaginary arrows. Fake it till you make it, right? The visible soundstage, G.I. Joe Retaliation. The extended cut of G.I. Joe Retaliation opens with a longer fight scene between Snake Eyes and his apprentice, Jinx. But amid the snappily edited fisticuffs, you'll kick yourself for not spotting this outrageous mistake. When Snake Eyes flips away from one of Jinx's attacks, the rigging of the soundstage where the scene was shot is blatantly visible at the top, complete with the lights used for the scene. Evidently, a VFX artist forgot to mask out the roof of the soundstage and replace it with something that made sense. Possibly because this scene wasn't completed during post-production for the theatrical version, and only hastily finished for the home video extended cut later on. Either way, considering how damn cool this shot is otherwise, it's a shame that due diligence wasn't undertaken to actually get it done properly. Then again, how many of you like this movie enough to even bother with the extended cut at all? Sorry, Joe.